and we all learned a lot. Maybe I should, I'm sorry, do a brief introduction.
Oh, sure.
Tim is part of, is a leadership, a person who leads coaching emerging leaders and and of course team leadership. And he has been doing this for quite a while, even though he looks very young. He became certified to use the tools and assessments created by Giant worldwide to unlock our leadership potential and, of course, our relationship potentials in the work and life areas. So I'm going to turn this right over to Tim.
Great. Thanks, Val. Yeah. Um, yeah, so like Val said, yeah, I'm excited to be here. And yeah, my mission, my goal in what I do is to help create high performing and flourishing leaders. So a lot of times in leadership development, we hear a lot about like, okay, how do I get more out of people? How do we become high performers, right? But I think flourishing is just as important. It is, how do we do this? And how do we create an environment that's healthy? How do we create something that's going to be sustainable for people, that will actually like growth that will last? And that's part of flourishing, where people get to be themselves as well, be the best versions of themselves. So yeah, and I'm going to talk about leadership a lot. I mentioned this last time. If you get caught up on the word leadership, thinking like, oh man, I'm not in charge, I don't have a position of authority. Really, leadership, it happens through influence, and influence happens through relationships, and everybody here has relationships with people. So these tools will be useful to you in any sort of relationship that you're in. And of course, I mean, you signed up for a leadership workshop, so maybe there's at least some interest that you have. So hopefully we'll all learn something together. Can we all just make sure we're muted? I'll just say this, since we are recording, just for for privacy stuff. Don't want you to pop up on the recording unintentionally. At the end, we'll stop the recording and we'll have a time for open sharing. But for now, if you want to communicate with me or communicate with each other, feel free to use the chat. That's a great way to ask questions. I'll go through the chat at the end. And as we go along, and I'll have some questions where I'll ask you to go through the chat. So just some housekeeping there. Yeah, so Val mentioned Giant. I just want to give us a little bit of context for what that is. Giant Worldwide, they've created what they call the Leaders Toolkit. So that is, everything that you need to know about leadership, about becoming a leader worth following, about leading other leaders worth following, and then leading organizations worth following and being a part of. And they've created tools so that anybody can pick it up. They say like an educated 13-year-old can learn these tools. And how do they work? They are visual tools. Leadership language. So we all probably have encountered some stuff like this before, quotes or books, concepts, the truths of the universe, truths of life, right? And instead of just writing books about them, books are great, but these tools are actually communicated in a visual format. A visual tool, there'll be like pictures, words. The reason they do that is because it is simple, something that we can get immediately. We live in the information age where there is an overabundance of words and things to process. We all have that coworker who sends really long emails and they're kind of a bore to read, right? But what if instead we just shrunk it all down into something that you can get really simply, really easily? Well, then it becomes practical. It becomes something you can use like a tool. And because it's so simple and practical, it's something you can share with others really easily. And then it becomes scalable as well. And then these tools, because they're based on leadership principles, they create transformation. I like to say 100% healthy. It's like where the goal is to help you reach your potential to be 100% high performing and flourishing. And also because, again, since they're scalable, they're easy to create intentional multiplication, meaning that I am healthy and I'm helping other people around me be healthy. So hopefully at the end of this, you all go to the people that you live with and work with, and you're able to share these tools with people and multiply these tools in other people and, you know, share the love. So that's how the tools work: leadership language, visual tools, and they create transformation and multiplication. Cool. What often happens when I first encounter a new client, potential client, the mindset is often this: show me how to fix my people, right? You know, I've got John over here. He's not doing what he needs to do. He's not getting the right numbers. And how do I get John up to a higher level, or whoever, right? Or also, interestingly, I work with a lot of younger people my age, maybe not in a leadership position quite yet, but they work in an organization and they just have maybe a bad boss. And they say, like, show me how to fix my boss, right? How do I figure this out? And yeah, the truth is, though, a more helpful mindset is that leading others begins with leading ourselves. We talked a little bit about this in the last workshop. We talked about the circles of influence, and we got to start with that one in the middle there, the circle of self. We've got to lead ourselves well first. And that's because you can't give what you don't already possess. But also, when we're doing some sort of engagement like this, or if I'm coaching someone, you know, I'm focused on you, right? I've got you in the room right now. I don't have John or your boss or whoever else is causing problems. So let's focus on you and how we can get, you know, improve your performance and health, right? So, and then also, you know, we also talked last week about how different leaders kind of create different types of cultures within their workplace. So if you see lots of problems in your team, for example, sometimes changes need to happen with you or with me, right? I got to change the way that I'm maybe overprotecting or dominating or abdicating some responsibility, and bring more support and challenge. Again, harking back to what we talked about last week. So so there's the circles of influence we talked about before. So we need to, what we're going to do today is we're going to focus on that circle of self. We're going to focus on, how do I support and challenge myself well? How do I get myself to do better in different areas of life? And we asked this question. I asked a version of this question at the beginning of our last conversation, but I wanted to dive deeper into that and ask it in a different way. But here's the question that helps us to really jumpstart or kickstart our self-leadership journey. And it's this: what is it like to be on the other side of me? And right underneath that, there's a picture of a mirror, because what we need is to be able to look in the mirror, right? We've all probably, hopefully we've all looked in the mirror today. If you've not looked in the mirror, maybe you're looking at your video right now so you can see something that looks like a mirror. But it's super helpful for us to be aware of our appearance, to be aware of how we come across to other people, because we can adjust things that might repulse people, for example, right? So here is some really specific things that we can key in on. For example, are we more proactive or are we more reactive, right? Do we get out ahead of things and try to plan and be responsible, or do we just react to things, right? Are we intentional or accidental? We talked about this again last week. Imagine you're canoeing or kayaking upstream, right? That's intentionality. That is moving in a direction you want to go rather than letting the current take you where it's going to take you. That's intentionality, being aware, self-aware. Another one is being consistent versus inconsistent, right? So we may be showing up really well in one place, but really slacking off in another area, or it's just not consistent. We don't do the same results over time. So I'm going to take a minute. We're going to take a minute together to do some personal reflection on this, with a mirror, right? So hopefully if you've got a pen and paper or pencil and paper, I got a little notepad here. If you don't, I would really encourage you to get one, or if you've got an iPad or drawing tablet, whatever you got, because we're going to do some note taking, but we're also going to do some drawing later on. So I want us to kind of just think and process this question here. We're just going to do it together, do it individually rather, and then you won't have to share about this one quite yet, so you can be real honest. But just think about, what is it like to be on the other side of me in each of these circles of influence? You don't have to go through all of them. Maybe just pick one. So think about your family, your team, your organization, or your community, and then go through each of those pairs. Am I more reactive, or am I more proactive? Am I more accidental, or am I more intentional? Am I more consistent, or am I more inconsistent? Okay, so I'll stop talking here for a minute and just give us some time to process. Pick at least one of those circles of influence and think about how you show up. What is it like for the people in that circle to be on the other side of you? All right, and of course, if you have questions, feel free to enter them in the chat, but we'll just do a personal reflection here for just a minute. Okay, so hopefully you're wrapping up here. You've got maybe even rated yourself on one scale of 1 to 10, or drew little sliders, whatever you want to do. I'm a big fan of improvising. But yeah, so as you have written some of these things down, imagine that's you looking in the mirror and seeing like a big piece of broccoli in your teeth, right? And I'm like checking my teeth now as I'm saying that. But it's a big piece of broccoli in your teeth, or like you're at a dinner party and someone goes like, hey, you got something there, right? But what's the feeling there? Usually for me, it's like, oh my goodness, how long has it been there? I gotta fix this right now, right? It's we usually have some sort of response. We usually, a smart person is going to, or a wise person is going to make a change, right? So, so what do we do now that we've looked in the mirror and we've seen something? How many of us have experience with New Year's resolution? Maybe this is more of a rhetorical question. I'll raise my hand, but let's go into more of a discussion. In the chat, I would love to hear what is a New Year's resolution that you have maybe failed, or maybe that you've succeeded in? What's like your experience with, and it doesn't have to be a New Year's resolution, maybe it's something that you've tried to make a big change. if it failed, what was maybe something that made it a little difficult? If it was successful, what were some things that you feel like you did really well? But yeah, let's maybe share something a little bit more fun. What were some New Year's resolutions that you've made in the past, and were you able to keep them? Let me open the chat while I'm here. I think I've been able to see. Yeah, okay, cool. This might be a pretty personal thing. Switch to a vegan diet. That's, yeah, so change diets. That's really good. Were you able to keep it up over the years or throughout the year? Yes, 3 years now. Okay, very cool, very cool. All right, what else? I know for me in early last year, in early 2022, I developed a new regimen for just doing a weekly review and looking back at the week and journaling about it, and then looking ahead to the next week and what I want to do in the next week. Okay, I've learned not to not make big resolutions, but just incremental ones on the change I want to make. Yeah, okay. Do you have an example of an incremental change that you've made recently? I'm curious to hear that. If you've got one. It's really good. Stick with walking the park at least once a week. Yeah, that's awesome. Got a great park here. Yes, when I was working from home, it was just really important for me to get outside at least once a day, especially in the winter, when I didn't want to go outside, or even when it's really hot. Yeah, so that's really important. Anybody else? I see a few more people here. If you're available and able to share, love to hear one. Carve out time in my schedule for reflection and contemplation. Yeah, that's important. Might be interesting to hear one that maybe didn't work out so well. I've always tried to, so speaking of reflection and contemplation, I'm a big podcast listener, so I've tried to actually cut some of that out, so that I have more space for silence in my in my life, or just not content constantly, but that I've always kind of fallen back with that one. Okay, well, these have been interesting. It's good to hear what people like working on for themselves, and how we make changes. So we're familiar with changes. Some of them have been successful. I'm sure we all don't want to share the ones that maybe we didn't do so well on. I see another comment here. Instead of cutting all the way down on TV, it's just been watching one evening a week. So yeah, so making that change, maybe not trying to make such a big change, but small changes, incremental over time. Yeah, that's great. Yep, cool. Yeah, so here are some tips that we've already kind of gathered that help us to make changes to lead ourselves better in different areas of our life. Here's something that we may know already, but that by the second week of February, some 80% of resolutioners back at home with a new kind of remorse staring back at them in the mirror, the remorse of disappointment. So, by February, sometimes all of the excitement that we have for the new year has worn off, and we are sometimes back to those old habits that we've had before. So again, I'm driving this point home, is like, sometimes no matter when we choose to make them, personal resolutions, to change largely fail over time. So let's just look at an example. Let's say, okay, you have this goal of I want to be healthier. So we've looked in the mirror and we've made the decision that we want to be healthier. What does it look like? Why do we say that? Because maybe you're saying something like, I haven't been to a gym since middle school, or we practice offset eating where you eat a piece of broccoli because you had some ice cream, or you ate broccoli so you can have some ice cream later, right? So maybe we have some interesting ways of justifying how we eat. Or for example, I really only need a couple hours of sleep every night, and that just doesn't work out because it's not a healthy amount of sleep. So we see those things when we look in the mirror. And that's what I would call the current reality. When we look in the mirror, we see our current reality. We see what's currently happening in our life. Here's another example. I want to stop being so short-tempered, right? More of a behavioral mindset sort of thing. What are some things that might make us want that is, well, maybe you sent a quick, maybe not so thoughtful email or text response that you regretted, or maybe you rush in and micromanage your team and you wish you didn't, or maybe your family gets your best and your worst at times. Maybe you have raised your voice at your loved ones, or just did something that you're ashamed of because of that quick temper, right? So that's the current reality. We see those things and we say, man, I've got to change that. That's the broccoli in our teeth. So I'm gonna bring up this tool. I'm gonna bring up part of this tool, and let's draw it together. So get out your pens and paper. This is the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool, and we're gonna be talking about this for pretty much the rest of our time here together. But what you're gonna do is draw an infinity loop or a figure 8 and turn it sideways. You want it big enough that you can write Know Yourself and Lead Yourself in the middle there, but small enough that you can write some things around it as well. There's some words around it too. So as you're drawing, hopefully I can talk you through this tool. So we've started already. We've talked about the reality, our current reality. We start over here. Well, when we start to dig deeper into our reality, we see the consequences that have led to our reality. And those consequences obviously are caused by our actions, right? The consequences are the effects of our actions. So the idea here behind the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool is we need to look at the current reality and our consequences to better understand ourselves, so then we can choose different actions and create different consequences, which will change our reality. So it's an infinity loop, because you never graduate from the school of self-awareness. It's a constant process. And the more you lead yourself, the better you're going to know yourself. And the better you know yourself, the better you're going to lead yourself. So what actions might we take, right? We're there. So maybe with that being healthier, we dive into a new diet. Some of us have been successful with the diets. Maybe we go to a gym, or we vow to go to bed earlier. Those vows are great, aren't they? Or for example, I want to stop being so short-tempered. Again, we make these promises and vows. We try harder, right? We try harder not to, next time someone irritates us, not to respond in a way we don't like. Or we vow not to let work affect us at home. But as you can see, especially when we have a resolution, like we're just going to try harder, these things don't really work well. And the reason is because we're only looking at part of the picture. We're trying to do these things voluntarily. We're trying to choose different actions, but sometimes these actions are actually involuntary. We recognize these actions we want after they've already happened. We recognize the actions that we don't want to happen after they've already happened. They're involuntary. They just kind of happen. And that's because our actions, our behavior is rooted in something different. So here's something you might want to write down is that your leadership behaviors, the behaviors that you exhibit in relationships, the way that you show up to people is rooted in three things. That is nature, nurture, and choice. And maybe if you've studied psychology or you know someone who does, or maybe you've just heard these words before, nature, nurture, and choice. All of these things together make us, well, they really inform our actions is what it is, right? So for example, nature. Nature is like the biology, it's the things that are hardwired into us. I like to call them your tendencies, your natural tendencies. These things don't change. They make you who you are. And it's you know, they're neither good nor bad. That's your nature. Nurture is kind of lays on top of nature. It's the patterns, and these things are in our life, and they're based on what I call the oughts and shoulds of our context. So maybe our culture, our family growing up, maybe our work environment, maybe just how, you know, our friends act, right? So that is nurture. We start to act in certain ways based on the pressure of the world around us. And I like to think of it as like, think of a green grass lawn or field or whatever. And maybe you have like a playground at one end and, the parking lot on the other end, for example, I don't know. And people will walk from one to the next. And the more people walk, the grass gets matted down and, dies. And then suddenly a path appears. And it's the same way that our brains are wired, is that we start acting and reacting in specific ways again and again and again. And over time, that becomes set in. We can change our patterns over time. We just need different actions over time to rewire. So, and then third, there is choice. So basically, we're trying to change our leadership behaviors based on choice alone, but we're ignoring 2/3 of the equation, the nature and nurture part. So we need to have some help, and we actually need to dig deeper into the roots of why we do what we do. So I'm going to bring back up the full Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool here. And you can think about, maybe you've got the top words here, and maybe you think about this as an iceberg with that's all the top, but we have to look at what's underneath here. And what's underneath is tendencies. Again, that's the nature part, the thing that makes us who we are. They're hardwired, they're not going to change, right? When something is scary, we react with a fear response. And that is natural, it's okay. But then those tendencies influence our patterns. So the pattern is maybe how you react to fear. Maybe it's a fight or flight response, right? For example. And those patterns are going to dictate our actions. So, maybe we sense the fear, we feel the fear, our fight response gets engaged, and we start yelling or screaming, for example, right? And that's how our tendencies inform our patterns, which dictate our actions. And then, of course, we follow it around and we have consequences in the reality. So this is the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool. And it helps give us the whole picture of what knowing ourselves to lead ourselves looks like. Because so often we're focused on maybe the top parts. We can see our reality, we understand our consequences, and our actions are usually pretty tangible. But we need to dig deeper into the patterns and tendencies and start trying to make changes in maybe the patterns area, so we can make better action choices. So I just want to give you an example of this, maybe not maybe, but from my own life. So for me, one of my the reality that I see when I look in the mirror is sometimes indecisiveness. And, often I can appear to flip-flop or seem flaky. I say that I'm going to do something and don't do it or change my mind. Or I take a while to make decisions, or I agree to do something that I really didn't want to do because I didn't really make that decision well the first time around. And digging underneath, there is a tendency that I have that is, I want to make a decision that is acceptable to everyone. And on its face, that's not a bad thing. On its face, that's an okay thing to have. It makes me who I am. I want to act according to my values, and I value, people being cared for, right? But the pattern is when I need to step into a new or uncertain area, or what usually happens is I have that involuntary tendency to depend on others or look to others to know what to do, and that's what leads to the indecisiveness. And so what happens what's the action that happens is I delay making the decision. I kind of waffle and don't make a decision very quickly. Or I push it off to others. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you want to do? I don't know. I'll do whatever, right? I maybe push down my own thoughts and feelings. And, I kind of disengage in some ways from the decision-making process. And that all is what kind of contributes to indecisiveness. And, of course, I can tend to, the reality is that I can tend to seem very inconsistent or reactive, or maybe that I'm an abdicator. I abdicate responsibility at times, right? And that's all rooted in this indecisiveness. But if I just stay here at the actions and say, okay, I need to just make decisions quicker, just need to do this action better, obviously that's not going to be any better. I'm just going to say the first thing that pops into my mind, and that's not the real problem. The issue is I look outwards to everyone else instead of looking inwards to myself to determine what I want, right? So I've got to work on that for myself, is connecting with myself before making a decision. So that's where I change the pattern, and then I can choose different actions, which will hopefully lead to more, thoughtful decisions and a more consistent and proactive approach. So that's an example for me. I want to give you all the chance to do this. So we're going to do some personal reflection. And then after this, I'd love to hear a few people kind of share what they're reflecting. Obviously, still, if you have some questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can ask them in the next time here. We're going to turn off the recording so that it'll be a little bit more, a little less, a little more comfortable for sharing, I guess would be a way of putting it. So here's the question that I want us to ponder and think about. We're going to give you plenty of time to think about this. Is think about a behavior that impacts your leadership, your influence, how you show up to people in a negative way. What's one thing that you look in the mirror and that's a big piece of broccoli in your teeth? Okay. And then we're going to work through some of those words around the Know Yourself to Lead Yourself tool. Think about the consequences. What does that look like when you do this action, right? What are some consequences you've encountered because of it? What are the actions taken? What are the things that you do? What's the actual behavior that tends to lead to those consequences? And then, ask yourself why a few times. What are the underlying tendencies that might be driving these actions? Okay. So that one might take the most time and the most thought because it's going to take some probing, but maybe these are things we've thought about before. So I want us to take about 5 minutes, just process, take your pen and paper out, and maybe you can even write around the the infinity loop if you want the know yourself to lead yourself tool. But use the tool that you have in front of you here to answer the question, what's a leadership behavior that impacts you in a negative way? What are the consequences? What are some actions that result in those consequences? And what are the underlying tendencies? Dig a little deeper underneath the actions. Okay. Let's take some time to do that now, and we'll come back in a couple minutes. And if you have any questions, feel free to pop in the chat.